Dr. Ilami.
Yes, sir. You are the
Dr.
co-host
Ilami.
now, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
thank you. I've seen it.
Yes.
Please, this student, you need to help me to mute all of them because I don't know why they can't keep to simple instruction. You ask them to mute themselves, they will still want to disturb the peace of the class. So please, you can't help me mute all of them. Dr. Ilami. Dr. Ilami. Dr. Ilami, are you there?
I'm here.
Please, just like I said, you have to mute them. And what about the YouTube stuff?
Yes,
The YouTube
it's on.
link
It's on
is
already.
on.
It's on already. It's on,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.
I don't know if Dr. Ajayi is there.
I don't
Okay,
think
it doesn't
so. I
matter.
don't know. I don't.
Okay,
Mm.
it doesn't matter. So
Okay. Okay, sir.
thank you so much. Ah. Oh, Allah. Good morning, class. We are on topic 3 now. So today, I'll be taking a look at major areas of specialization in economics. And after that, I also try to discuss historical development of economic thought. So those are the two areas or two topics we shall be covering today. So let us start. In economics, the study of the economy has different branches. But in order not to, in order to be more focused, I'm going to take a look at just 4 major areas of economy specialization. And these 4 areas are as follows. Number 1 is development economics. I'm going to take a look at major areas, of specialization in economics. So, but just like I said, economy delve into different areas of our lives. In economics, we have international economies, we have development economies, we have institutional economies, we have sport economies, we have spiritual economies, and so on and so forth. So, but today, I'll be focusing on major areas of economic studies. And this area are 1, development economies. The first one is development economies.
Recording in progress.
First one is development economies. Development economies. Economies. The second one is international economies. International economies. Economies. The third one is energy and environmental economies. Energy and environmental economies. The last one I'm going to talk about is what we call institutional economies. Institutional economies. So these are the 4 areas of specialization I'll be discussing under this particular topic. The first one is, just like I said, is development economies. The second one is international economies. The third one is energy and environmental economies. While the fourth, the last but not the least, is institutional economics. So development economy, the first one, what does it mean? We're talking about development economies. And what exactly do we need to know under development economies? Development economies is a branch of economics that focuses on improving the economic well-being and quality of life of people in developing economies or developing countries. And developing countries. Let me also repeat that. What I've said is that we're talking about development economies. Development economy is a branch of economies that focuses on what? On improving the economic well-being, improving economic well-being, and what? And quality of life of people in developing countries. So these development economies addresses key issues related to economic growth, poverty reduction, income inequalities, and the policy needed to improve living standards. What I've said is that development economies, of course, when you get to 300 level, for those of you in the economics department, and for those of you that want to take courses in that discipline, development economy is very central to economic studies. So, but what are those things? What are those issues development economy actually focus on? Development economy addresses key issue related to one, related to economic growth, anything that has to do with economic growth. Two, anything that has to do with poverty reduction. And three, anything that has to do with income inequality, as well as four, policy interventions that are needed to improve living standards. These are key areas of focus of development economies. Let me talk deeply on the first one, on each and every one of these. Let me take the first one. The first one is economic growth. This economic growth studies how economy grow over time. It studies how that is development economy studies how economies grow over time, considering such factors as capital accumulation, considering factors such as capital accumulation, that is under economic growth, capital accumulation, labor force participation, technological progress. all these things that I've mentioned, they are very, very critical to economic growth. Capital accumulation, labor force, and technological progress. In a nutshell, what we're trying to say here is that we talk about economic growth can be represented mathematically using mathematical notation as follows. That is, the growth, economic growth, is a function of what? It's a function of capital accumulation, labor force participation, and technological progress. All these three inputs, they explain economic what? They provide explanation to economic growth. That this economic growth majorly being determined by these three inputs or arguments, by these three arguments or inputs. And what are these inputs? Capital accumulation, labor force participation, and technological progress. That is what these three provide explanation to economic growth. So when we are studying, when we talk about economic growth, it studies how economic or how economies grow over time, considering such factors such as capital accumulation, labor force expansion or participation, and technological progress. So in a nutshell, growth is seen as necessary for improving living standard. But however, it is not sufficient to address the problem of what? Inequality. We talk about growth. Growth does not translate to what? It does not translate to removing inequality. So another area that development economies also focus on is, apart from growth, is poverty and inequality. Poverty and inequality. Poverty and inequality. Poverty and inequality. This is another area that development economy talk about. It talks about poverty and inequality. So central concern in development economies is how to reduce poverty and address problem of what? Problem of economic disparity or economic inequality within and between countries. Within and between countries. Between countries. Another thing that development economy talk about under this poverty and inequality is that it involves looking at policy that target income redistribution. Development economy talks about, since there's a problem of poverty and inequality, it talks about what are the policy measures that government can embark on to reduce poverty and to reduce income or wealth inequality. All these things are being addressed under development economies. Another key area that development economy talks about is human development. Another area is human development. Human development. What do you mean by human development? Human development focuses on increasing access to education, healthcare, and basic living standard. Poverty and inequality. The third one is human development. When we talk about human development, you're talking about education, people having access to education, healthcare facilities. All these things improves people living standard. All these are area of focus in what? In development economics. Another thing that development economy also focus on is what we call sustainable, number 4, sustainable development. What do you mean by sustainable development in this context? The integration of environmental sustainability with economic development. What I'm trying to say there is that at times you end up damaging your environment simply because you want to improve, you want to grow your economy. You want to grow your economy at the expense of the environment. But we're talking about sustainable development. Sustainable development means when you now balance the two, meaning that you are achieving economic growth without what? Without damaging the environment. All these things are being discussed or are area of focus under development economics. That is what we call sustainable development. When talking about sustainable development, what I'm simply trying to say is that is your development, is it sustainable? Sustainable means that as you are growing your economy, are you not at the same time damaging the environment? But when talking about sustainable development, it means you are growing your economy without necessarily damaging the what? The environment. These are areas of focus in development economy. Another one is what we call policy intervention. Development economies focus on the role of government policies, foreign aid, international organization in promoting development. All these things are all area of focus in what? In development economics. So that is the number 1 aspect of area of specialization in economics, development economics. So development economics focus on all these areas I've mentioned: economic growth, poverty and problem of inequality, human development, sustainable development, as well as number 5, as well as policy intervention. What policy will government adopt to resolve all these problems? All these things are discussed or are area of discussion or area of focus under development economics. Now, there are some theories on that explains development. There are some theories that explains development in the literature, in the economic literature. Basically, I'll be mentioning just only 3 of them. First of all, I'd like to talk about modernization theory. Modernization theory, that is example of key theories that underlines development studies. The first one is modernization theory. Modernization theory. Number 2 is dependency theory. Dependency theory. And number 3 is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism. Liberalism. These are theories that underline development studies. The first one is what we call modernization theory. This theory suggests that countries develop in a linear process, moving from traditional to modern stages of development. If you take a look at that, is if you are moving from agrarian now, agriculture, to what? To industrial. From industrial to what? To services. From services to, these are linear process. So that is what we call modernization theory. It suggests that countries develop in a linear process, moving from traditional to modern stages of development. For the dependency theory, this argues that developing countries are kept in a state of underdevelopment due to their historical dependence on wealthy nations. Wealthy nations. That is, this particular theory, dependency theory, it argues that developing countries are kept in a state of underdevelopment due to their historical dependence on wealthy nations. Example of that is, if you look at most countries in Africa, depend on what? On developed nations to survive. So that is what dependency theory tried to explain. The last one here is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism simply advocates for free market, deregulation, and privatization as the path to development. That is, the only way for any economy to develop is to embrace the principle of what? Free markets or deregulation and privatization. What we're trying to say here is that the neoliberalism simply suggests that government should play limited role in any economy. That is, the role of regulating the economy should be handled or, played by the what? By the free interplay of forces of demand and supply. So that's why I talk about privatization. That is, private individuals should be allowed to run the affairs of the economy, while government only play what? Only play a regulatory role. Government should not play any important role in an economy. Rather, government should just oversees the affairs of how the players in the economy, who are the players in this context, they are private sectors, private individuals. How do they regulate or play this market? How did they play the games in the economy in such a way that things move on smoothly without any interference from the government? So that is what neoliberalism talks about. Now, all these things that I've explained, they all come under development economy. Now, another area of socialization that I want to talk about is international economies. International economies. What do I mean by international economies? That is another area of socialization in economics. The first one that I just discussed is development. The second one is international economies. International examines the economic interactions. Simply examine economic interactions between countries, including trade, investment, and monetary relations. So these are the area that international economy focus attention on. It talks about economic interaction between countries. For instance, if you look at Nigeria has a trade relation with Ghana. Nigeria has a trade relation with Togo. Nigeria has a trade relation with UK, United Kingdom. Nigeria has a trade relation with what? With United States. All this thing comes under international trade. So international trade is a branch of economics that examines economic interactions between countries, including trade, investment. Nigerians can invest in Ghana. Nigerians can invest in Togo. The Togolese can invest in Nigeria. American can also invest in Nigeria. All these things, you can see that there is a mutual relationship between people, or in one particular economy, in another particular economy. So this is what we talk about economic interaction. So international trade examines the economic relationship between countries, including trade, investment, as well as monetary relations. For instance, IMF, International Monetary Fund, every countries in the world belong to these particular institutions. So all these things is what international economies capture. So international economy also look at how countries exchange goods, services, capital, labor, and the impact of such exchanges on their economic performance. That's another thing that international economy talks about. It looks at how countries exchange goods and services, even capital and labor, and the impact of such exchanges on their economic performance. If you look at, let me give an example that is very close to us. Look at Nigerians. Nigerians go to the US. What are they doing? Nigerians go to US to work. Is that not? So if you look at that, Nigeria working in the US, at the end of the day, will now send back some remittances back to Nigeria. So those are the remittances that grows Nigerian economy. So you can see that there's a mutual exchanges in terms of capital and labor between or among countries. So key area of focus of international economy, just like I did under development, are number one, international trade. Key area of focus of international economies. Number one is international trade. International trade. What do you mean by international trade? This studies the movement of goods and services across borders. This studies the movement of goods and services across borders. So topics such as trade agreements, trade policies, trade theories, and so on and so forth are captured under this international trade. Another area of focus of international economies is international finance. International finance. This focuses on the flow of capital between countries. International finance. 2, international finance. The first one I talk about is international trade. This one is international finance. International finance. So this focuses on the flow of capital between countries, exchange rates, foreign investment, global financial market, issues such as currency stabilization, capital control, financial crisis are central issues that are being discussed under international finance. These are the area of focus under international economies, international trade, international finance. And like I said, look at the word international finance. Anything that has to do with international financing, like foreign investment, exchange rate, flow of capital between countries, currency stabilization, capital controls, are area of concern under international finance. Another aspect that are very central to international economies is globalization. If you look at what is happening in the world today, interconnectedness. This analyzes the increasing interconnectedness of the world economy, how countries are interconnected. If you look at what is happening you are in Nigeria, you can oversee things that is happening in other parts of the world. So this is what globalization does. So this globalization also is another important area, key focal area in international economies. Another thing that is also of importance in international economy studies is balance of payment. That is a record of all financial transactions between a country and the rest of the world, including trade balances, capital flows, and foreign aid. So these are things that are being discussed, or these are issues that are being discussed under international economies. Just like I said, under development economies, there are some key theories that underline the study of international economies. Number one is what I would refer to as Ricardian theory of comparative advantage. Theories, I discussed some theories that underline development economies the other time. I talked about dependency theory. I talked about dependency theory. I talked about modernization theory, and I talked about neoliberalism. Also, under international economies, we can talk about one. We can talk about Ricardian theory of comparative advantage. What does that mean? What does mean is this suggests that countries should specialize in producing goods where they have a lower opportunity cost, leading to mutual gains from trade. That is what Ricardian theory of comparative advantage implies. It simply suggests that countries should specialize in producing goods where they have a lower opportunity cost, leading to mutual gain from trade. Another theory that underlines the study of international economic studies is Econ theory. What does this theory say? This theory focuses on how a country's relative factor endowments, such as land, labor, capital, determine its comparative advantage in trade. Just like Nigeria. Nigeria has a large deposit of crude oil. That is more reason why Nigeria tends to what? Focus more on production of crude oil. So that is exactly what Exxon is trying to say. He said that economy should focus on that is a country's relative factor endowment should determine a country comparative advantage in trade. So another thing that I would like to talk about is monetary theory. This is another theory that underline, international economies. So this simply studies the role of exchange rate, interest rate, monetary policy in the global economy. That is what monetary theory does. It studies the role of exchange rate, interest rate, monetary policy in the global economy. So all these are theories that underline international economics. Another major area of specialization in economics is energy and environmental economics. Energy and environmental economics. That's it, making it the third one that we'll be discussing. Making it the third one. Energy and environmental. 3. Energy and environmental economics. This is another area of specialization in economics. We have energy economics or environmental economics. So these are areas of specialization in economics, energy and environmental economics. So the energy and environmental economics focuses on the relationship between economic activity and the environment. Focuses on the relationship between economic activities and the environment. So this is another area of economy that focuses on economic activity and the environment, particularly in the context of energy use. To climate change, and sustainable resource management, and sustainable, let me write it out clearly, and sustainable resource management. So that is energy economy focuses on the relationship between economic activity economy, activities, and the what? And the environment. And the environment. And the environment. Particularly in the context of 1, energy use, 2, climate change, and 3, sustainable resource management. So this field of study aims to provide economic solution to environmental problems while promoting energy security and sustainability. So now, what are the key area of focus of this area, specialized area in the economics, or at this branch of economics? What are the key area of focus? The key area of focus, just like I mentioned under development and international economies, are as follows. 1, energy economies. That is key area of focus. Energy economies. The key area of focus are energy economies. Key area of focus. Key areas of focus. 1, energy economies. This energy economies examine the production, consumption, and distribution of energy resources. This examines the production, consumption, and distribution of energy resources, including fossil fuel like oil, coal, natural gas, and renewables such as solar, hydro, wind, and so on and so forth. As well as it analyzes pricing, regulation, policy impact on energy market. It analyzes pricing, policy, that the pricing of what? Pricing of fossil fuel and renewable energy on regulation, how they are being regulated, as well as the policy impact on the energy market. Another key area of focus under this particular branch of economics is climate change. Number 2 is climate change and environmental policy. Climate change and environmental policy. That is another key area of focus. Climate change, and environmental policy. This is another area of focus of energy and environmental economies. What do you mean by climate change and environment? This focuses on economic policy of climate change and the role of government policy in mitigating its effects. It focuses on economic impact of climate change and the role government play in mitigating its negative effects. So this includes carbon pricing, to cap and trade systems, and subsidy for clean energy, carbon pricing, cap and trade, as well as subsidy for clean energy. Another key area of focus, which is number 3 point, is resource management. 3, resource management. That is another area of focus of energy and environmental economies. So this resource management deals with the allocation and management of natural resources. It deals with the allocation and management of natural resources, considering their scarcity and sustainability. This includes managing renewable resources, e.g., forests, fisheries, as well as non-renewable resources, such as minerals, fossil fuel, and so on and so forth. These are all captured. These are key areas of focus of energy and environmental policy, resource management. How do we manage our resources efficiently? So, and we are dealing with this with the aim of allocating and managing what? The natural resources, considering, bearing in mind the scarcity as well as sustainability. So that is what resource management. Number 4, which is the last one I want to discuss, is externality. Externality. What do you mean by externality? Economic activity that have unintended side effects, such as pollutions, are also very critical in the study of energy and environmental economies. Externalities. Economic activity that have unintended side effects, such as pollution, are central in this field. So that is key area of focus under that particular branch or specialized area in economics. What are the key theories that underline this area, branch of economics? Number 1, talk about environmental goodness curve. Environmental goodness curve. Environmental goodness curve. Theories that underlines it. Theories that underline energy and environmental economies. E and E. Theory that underlines it. We call it EKC. EKC means environmental Kuznets curve. What does this suggest? That as economies grow, environmental degradation increases up to a point, but then decreases as the economic matures and can afford cleaner, technology. What I mean is that at initial stage of development, country tends to pollute the environment. At initial stages of development, at earlier stage of development, country tends to what? Pollute the environment. But as economy grows, what happens? Country, because they're now becoming richer and richer, they can afford to purchase cleaner technology. And as a result, what happened to the environment? The environment, instead of them degrading the environment, they now try to improve the environment through what? Through cleaner technology. So that is what environmental goodness curve is trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us that at the initial stage of the growth development, country tends to what? Degrade or damage the environment. But at some point, what happened? As the economy continues to mature, so, and as a result, economy cannot afford cleaner technology. So what happened to the environment at the end of the day? Environment will then tend to what? They tend to clean the environment. They tend to adopt cleaner technology that will improve the quality of the environment. That is what environmental goodness curve. And the other theory under this particular branch of economics is what is referred to as the quasi theory. The quasi theory. This proposes that private negotiation can lead to efficient environmental outcomes. This particular theory proposes that private negotiation can lead to efficient environmental outcomes when property rights are well defined. An example of this, which I can give, is look at what is happening in the Niger Delta area, where the Shell, all oil producing company, are polluting, damaging these people's environment. If the people, the inhabitants of that particular environment, they have, well-defined property rights, they can go to private negotiation with this oil companies. They can go into private negotiation that if you damage our environment, this is what that you have to pay for damaging, and these are what that you have to do to improve the quality of our environment. That is what policy theory is trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us that it proposes that private negotiation can lead to efficient environmental outcomes when property rights are well defined and transaction costs are low. So that is the last but not the least on the area of specialization in economics I want to talk about is institutional economics. Institutional economics. Institutional economics. Institutional economics. What do you mean by institutional economics? Institutional economics. Institutional economics. Institutional economics. What do you mean by institutional economics? Institutional economics, this is a branch of economy that examines the role of institutions. It examines the role of institutions. Institutions. What do you mean by institutions? Institutions are defined as formal rules. What are examples of rules are laws and regulation. Laws and regulation. And informal rules. Informal rules. What are the examples of informal rules? Norm and culture. Norm and culture. Norm and culture. That's the example of informal rule. Let me write it out like this. Let me write it out like this. Formal rules. Formal rules and informal rules. Example of formal rules are laws and regulations. And regulations. Example of informal rules are norms and culture. So institutional economy examines the role of institution. And what are institutions? Institution can be defined as what? As defined as formal rules and informal rules in shaping what? In shaping economic behavior. In shaping economic behavior and outcomes. Economic behavior and outcomes. Meaning that if we don't have rules that guides our affairs, everybody can do anything at any point in time. But people cannot do anything they want at any point in time because there are rules and regulations, there are norms and culture that shape our behavior. So that is what the institution does. Institution helps to shape our economic behavior and outcome. So it investigates. So international institutional economy investigates how institutions evolve over time and their impact on economic performance. That is what institutional economy does. It investigates how institutions evolve over time and their impact on economic performance. So what are the key areas of focus of institutional economy? Just like I've been discussing under each of those specialized areas that I've discussed before. Number one, key area of focus under this particular branch of economics is number one is property right. Property right. Property right. Property right. Property right. This means the assignment and protection of property are fundamental to institutional economies. These property rights are very fundamental to institutional economies because it clear property right leads to better resource allocation. clear property rights. That is legal ownership. That's what it means, legal ownership of resources. If you are a legal right owner of your resources, you can determine where to sell, whether to sell it or whether to hold on to it. So if you have a property, if you have a legal owner, if you are a legal owner of any particular property or any particular resource, if you have a property right, if you have a clear property right on it, it leads to better resource allocation. 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 Resource allocation, investment, and economic growth. And economic growth. And economic growth. So that's one of the key areas of focus in institutional economy. The number two is market functioning. Market functioning. Market functioning. This area studies how institutions shape market outcomes. This market functioning shows how institutions shape market outcomes, such as development of markets, the role of government in regulating markets, and the presence of market failure. Example, information asymmetry, monopoly. So market functioning. This is another key area of focus under institutional economy. The third one is governance and corruption. Governance and corruption. This also come under institutional economics. Governance and corruption. Number three, governance and corruption. Governance and corruption. So institutional economics explore how governance structure. Example of that is political structure, legal framework affect economic outcomes. How governance structure affect economic outcomes. Corruption, inefficient legal system, weak institution can hinder development and economic efficiency. Corruption, weak legal framework, inefficient legal system, weak institution can hinder development and economic efficiency. Can hinder development and economic efficiency. Economic efficiency. So all these issues are being treated under institutional economy, governance, and corruption. The last one is transaction cost. 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 Fourth one. Transaction cost. Cost. These are costs associated with making an exchange. These are costs that are associated with making an exchange, such as searching for information, negotiating contracts, enforcing agreements. All these things are associated with transaction costs. When you search for information, negotiating contracts, enforcing agreements. So high transaction costs can prevent efficient market and hinder economic growth. All these things are key area of focus under institutional economics. Let me mention the four major areas that talked about or touchy area of focus under institutional economy. Number one is property rights. Number two is market functioning. The number three is governance and corruption. The number four is transaction cost. Now, what are the key theories that underlines institutional, economy? Just like I've been mentioning for other specialized area of specialization under economies. Number one is what we call new institutional economies. New institutional economies. Number one is new institutional economies. New institutional economies. New institutional economies. That's number one. That is theory. Key theories. Key theories that underline institutional economy. Number one is NIE. We call it new institutional economies. This focuses on how institutions shape economic outcome. It focuses on how institutions shape economic outcome by examining costs of transaction, the role of information, the role of legal and political framework. These are captured under new institutional economies. Another theory that is of interest under institutional economies is theory of institutional change. Theories of institutional change. Institutional change. Theory of institutional change. This studies how institutions evolve and adapt, often through historical and path-dependent processes. Path-dependent processes. This, let me write it out. Theory of institutional changes studies how institutions evolve and adapt. That is theories of institutional changes. It's not change. Studies how institutions evolve and adapt, often through what? Often through historical and path-dependent outcomes. Let me explain what path-dependent outcome means. Path-dependent outcome means if your present behavior is being influenced by your previous behavior. That's what we call path dependency. If your present attitude, your present behavior is being influenced by your previous attitude, we call it path dependency. So that is study of theory of institutional change. Simply study how institutions evolve and adapt, often through historical and path-dependent process. So, of course, this includes the role of institutions in facilitating or obstructing economic development. These are areas of specialization, or these are branches of economies that people can specialize on when studying economics. So each of these branches of economies provide, each of these branches of economies provides valuable insight into different aspects of economic behavior, policy, and outcomes. So development economics, for instance, emphasizes growth and equity. International economics explores what? Interconnectedness of economies. Energy and environmental economics addresses the challenges of sustainability. And the last one, which is not the least, is institutional economics. This highlights the role of institution in shaping economic system. So together, this area of economy offer a comprehensive framework. They offer a comprehensive framework for understanding the global economic landscape and the challenges faced by nation in the modern world. These are things that these branches of economics try to, talk about. So that is that on topic 3. We now go to topic 4 that talks about historical development of economic thought. Topic 4. If you look at your course outline, is there. Topic 4. Topic 4 dwell on historical development of economic thought. Topic 4 dwell on historical development of economic thought. Economic thought. We're going to take a look at this historical development, discussing key school of thought in economics. We are going to talk about classical economics. Talk about classical economics. 2, we're going to talk about neoclassical economy, neoclassical economies. Number 3, we're going to talk about Utilitarianism, utilitarianism. Number 3, we're going to talk about utilitarianism, utilitarianism. The last one is I will talk about welfare economics. So these are historical development thought, historical development of economic thought. So now let's take them one after the other. Economic thought has evolved significantly over time, with contribution from various thinkers, shaping the discipline as we know it today. Now, we want to take a look at the first one. How does these schools of thought and the influential economists that belong to these schools of thought, how do they are what inspired, and how do these schools of thought, how do they evolve over time? That's what we want to discuss. Let's take the first one, the classical economists. The classical economists, the key economists under it, I think that's it. In our first class, we mentioned this in our first class. When the first topic, rather, we mentioned it. But let's take a look at historical development of economic thought now. Starting from classical economics. So the key economists under this classical economy. The key economists are Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Thomas Malthus. These are key economists under these schools of thought, classical economists. Now, let us discuss these schools of thought now. These classical economists emerged in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Let me write it. That is, these schools of thought, classical economies emerged in the late 18th century, and early 19th centuries. As a response, they came up as a response to mercantilism. These are the dominant economies, thought that was popular before classical economy came on board. Mercantilism, and feudalism, which is feudal economic system. Feudal economic system. So they emerged in the late 18th century and the early 19th century as a response to these two economic systems that dominated before this classical emerged. So these classical economies, what do they emphasize? The emphasis of the classical economies are as follows. They emphasize free market. What do you mean by free market? Free market simply means force of demand and supply should determine everything. That's what it means. They emphasize free market, self-regulation. That the government should not play any significant role. Everything should be left to the whims and caprices of market forces. What are the market forces in this regard? Market forces means demand and supply. So the classical economies emphasize free markets, self-regulation, and the idea that economy naturally tends to equilibrium. That is their belief, that economy naturally tends to equilibrium. So the classical economists believe in the efficiency of market and the importance of limited government intervention. These are things that are very peculiar about this school of thought. They emphasize free market, self-regulation, and limited government intervention. So what are the core idea of the classical economists? What are the core idea of these classical economists? What are the core idea of the classical economy? The core idea of classical economists. The core idea of the classical economists. Number one is core ideas of the classical economy. Number one is labor theory of value. Labor theory of value. Two, invisible hand. Invisible hands. Three, division of labor. Division of labor. Four, comparative advantage. Comparative advantage. Five, population and resources. Population and resources. These are the core ideas of the classical economics. Let's take the first one, labor theory of value. What do they mean by labor theory of value? The classical economists argue that the value of a good or service was determined by the amount of labor required to produce it. That's what it means. That is, to the classicalists, they believe that the value of a good or service was determined by the what? By the amount of labor required to produce it. By the amount of labor required to produce that good or service. That is what labor theory of value means to the classicalists. Labor theory of value. That is, they argue that, the classical economists argue that the value of a good or service was determined by the amount of labor required to produce it. Invisible hand. This is another core idea of this classical schools of thought. Invisible hand. What do they mean by invisible hand? The Adam Smith's famous concept where individual Adam Smith came up, Adam Smith is the father of economics, came up with this idea of visible hand. His own idea was that Adam Smith's famous concept where individual pursuing self-interest unintentionally benefits society as a whole. That in the process of pursuing your self-interest, it benefits society as a whole. So the free market guided by the invisible hand will ensure, according to Adam Smith, that the free hand, what do you mean by free hand? Free market. The free market guided by invisible hand. Invisible hand means where market forces is the forces that determine what is happening within an economy. Market forces mean there is no government intervention. Rather, everything should be regulated or should be determined by the forces of demand and supply. So where forces of demand and supply determines everything, we call it free market. So Adam Smith's famous concept is where the individual pursuing self-interest unintentionally benefits society. That is, if you are pursuing your self-interest without you knowing, it's going to benefit society as a whole. So the free market, guided by invisible hand, according to Adam Smith, will ensure efficient allocation of resources. That's what we call invisible hand. The number 3 core idea of the classical schools of economics is division of labor. Adam Smith also emphasized here that the importance of specialization in production, which will lead to what? Will lead to increased efficiency and wealth creation. That is, if people specialize in a particular task, without having to divide their tasks among different other tasks, it will lead to what? It will lead to increased efficiency and wealth creation. So that is another core idea of the classical schools of economy. Another one is what we call comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, that concept of comparative advantage is associated with David Ricardo. David Ricardo introduced the theory of comparative advantage, which posits that even if one country is less efficient in producing all goods than another country, both can benefit from trade. By specializing in the production, they produce relatively more efficiently. Even if you don't have, if a country is less efficient in producing all goods, it puts, what David Ricardo said is that both countries can still benefit from trade. By what? By specializing in the good in which they produce more efficiently. The last one is population and resources. This population and resources is associated with Thomas Malthus. This population and resources is associated, the concept of population and resources is associated with Thomas Malthus. He's known for his theory on population growth. He argued that while population grows geometrically, resources grow arithmetically. Resources in terms of food grow arithmetically, leading to what? Leading to inevitable poverty and famine, unless checked by natural limitations such as war, diseases, and moral restraint. So what Thomas Malthus is trying to say is that if you look at population of a country and the resources, while population grow in a geometrical form, food will grow in what? In arithmetical. So if you take a look at that, means the rate at which population grows is more than the rate at which resources grow. And even if that occurs in any economy, it will result to what? Poverty. Poverty will result, and famine, hunger will also result from that economy. The only thing that can shake it is when there is a when that country experience natural phenomenon or natural limitations such as war, diseases, or moral restraint, that is the only thing that can check, these two phenomena from, creating a problem in an economy. So that is the core idea of the classical economy. So meaning that the classical economy laid the foundation for modern economics theory. In what way? Because they advocate for laissez-faire policies, as well as emphasizing the role of market in determining prices and resource allocation. That is to the classical economics. The number two school of thought that I want to discuss is neoclassical economics. Neoclassical economics. Neoclassical economics. Neoclassical economics. Neoclassical economics. That is the second school of thought we want to discuss under this historical development of economic thought. The second one is neoclassical economics. Look at the word neo. The first one we treated is classical. Neo means new classical economics. That means the first one is classical. Neo means new classical economics. So the economists here are Alfred Marshall, and Leo Warros. These are the prominent economists under these schools of thought, neo-classical economics, Alfred Marshall and Leo Warros. So now let us take a brief overview of the classical economics. The classical economics emerged in the late 19th century. As a refinement of what? Of classical economics. I've said that before. As a refinement of classical economy. So that is, they came to modernize the classical economy. That is what it means. They came to modernize it. So it's a refinement of the classical economies. So they integrated, this school of thought integrated marginal analysis and mathematical modeling into economics. These schools of thought integrated marginal analysis and what? And mathematical modeling into economics by focusing on the what? By focusing on equilibrium between demand and supply in market. Focusing on the equilibrium between supply and demand in market. So what are the key ideas of these schools of economy? Just like I mentioned under classical, what are the core ideas? What are the core idea of these schools of economics? Number one is marginalism. Two, market equilibrium. Three, utility theory. Four, general equilibrium. And five is price theory. These are the core areas of that schools of thought. Let's take the first one, let's take them one after the other. The first one is marginalism. The neoclassical economists shifted focus from the total value of goods to the marginal value. So that's what we call marginalism. They shifted. That is the classical economists focus on is on total value of goods, but to the neoclassical, they shifted their focus from the total value of goods to the marginal value. What do you mean by marginal value? The marginal value simply means additional benefit derived from consuming or producing one more unit of a good or service. So this approach underpins much of modern microeconomics theory. This approach underpins much of modern microeconomics marginalism. That's number one. Number two is market equilibrium. Just like classical economists, neoclassical economy emphasize market efficiency. They also emphasize market efficiency, just like the classical economy, but they introduce a more sophisticated understanding of market equilibrium, where supply equal demand at a certain price level. They introduce a more sophisticated understanding. So that means the both schools of thought emphasizes what? They emphasize market equilibrium. But that of neoclassical introduce a more sophisticated understanding of market equilibrium, where supply equals demand at a certain price level. The number three is utility theory. The neoclassical economists develop the concept of utility, where individuals seek to maximize their satisfaction or happiness from consumption, where individuals seek to maximize their satisfaction or happiness from consumption. So the marginal utility of each good or service decline as more is consumed. So they introduced it. That is the concept of marginal utility. The fourth one is general equilibrium. The general equilibrium is associated with Leo Warros. Leo Warros is known for developing the concept of general equilibrium. And what does this general equilibrium? It shows how prices and quantity in multiple markets can adjust simultaneously to reach a state of equilibrium. How prices and quantity in multiple markets can adjust simultaneously to reach a state of equilibrium. Assuming we have one market here, we have several markets. How each of these markets, that is multiple markets, assuming we have 1,000 markets, for instance, how all these markets adjust their prices and quantity simultaneously to reach a what? To reach a state of equilibrium. That's what is meant by general equilibrium. So the person that came up with the idea is what they call Leo Warros. And the last but not the least on the core idea of neoclassical is price theory. Alfred Marshall introduced the concept of price elasticity, supply curve, the determination of equilibrium prices through the interaction of supply and demand. The person that introduced it is Alfred Marshall. So Alfred Marshall introduced the concept of price elasticity, supply curve, determination of equilibrium price through the interaction of demand and supply. So his work of this particular economist remain foundational to modern microeconomics. That is the core of neoclassical economics. The third schools of thought I would like to discuss or talk about is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. That's the third schools of thought that I want to discuss. Utilitarianism. The key economists here are Jeremy Bentham. The key economist is Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. These are the key economists that champion the discussion under these schools of thought, utilitarianism. So what is utilitarianism? is a philosophical theory that was applied to economists. Utilitarianism is a philosophical theory that was applied to economists, particularly by these two economists, Jeremy Bentham and Justin Mill. So this concept posits that the best action or policy are those that maximizes happiness. Let me write that out, because it's very important to understand what the concept means. That is the best action. The best action. It posits that it posits that the best actions or policies are those that maximize happiness or utility for the greatest number of people, for the greatest number of people. That is what the concept means. It posits that the best action or policy are those that maximize happiness or utility for the greatest number of people. So what are the core idea of these schools of thought? What are the core idea? Just like we said under classical and neoclassical schools of thought. What are the core idea of these schools of thought? What are the core idea? Core ideas. One, the principle of utility. The principle of utility. Two, cost benefit analysis. Cost benefits analysis. Three, social welfare. Social welfare. 4, distribution of wealth. Distribution of wealth. These are the core ideas of utilitarianism. Let's take the first one, the principle of utility. The Bentham, that is Jeremy Bentham, introduced the idea that human behavior is driven by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. That is what he said, that this human behavior is driven by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. So the greatest happiness concept argues that actions are right if they produce the greatest good for the greatest number. That is, the greatest happiness principle argues that actions are right if they produce the greatest good for the greatest number. That is what the principle of utility under utilitarianism tries to say. The second one is cost-benefit analysis. This utilitarianism also encourages a cost-benefit analysis of policies or decisions, in the sense that, according to them, if the benefit outweigh the cost, a policy is deemed justifiable. That is, immediately you discover that the benefit that will be derived from a particular action outweighs or is more than the cost, that policy is what? Is justifiable. That is the cost-benefit analysis. That is another core of their argument. The third one is what we call social welfare. This social welfare is an idea that was extended by John Stuart Mill. That is, John Stuart Mill also just extended what Bentham have said before. What does it mean? He said, considering not just individual utility, but by considering the overall well-being of a society. You know, Bentham focuses on individual utility, but John Stuart Mill extended Bentham's idea, considering not just individual utility, but the overall well-being of society. So he supported policy that will improve individual freedom and societal welfare. That is, any policy that will improve individual freedom and social welfare is what is, John Stuart Mill supported. So he just extended what Jeremy Bentham had already said. So, but instead of focusing on individual this time around, he tried to extend it to society. So that is the extension. The last one is what we call distribution of wealth. Why Bentham focused on utility maximization without much concern for distribution? John Stuart Mill argued for addressing inequality in wealth to enhance social welfare. That is another extension by John Stuart Mill. He tried to extend by talking about distribution of wealth, because the first economist, which is Jeremy Bentham, did not focus on what? Did not focus on societal welfare or social welfare. So he only focused on utility maximization without much concern for distribution. But John Stuart Mill argued for addressing inequality in wealth to enhance social welfare. These are the core of utilitarianism. The last one, but not the least, is welfare economies. Welfare economies. Welfare economies. Welfare economies. That's the last schools of thought under this particular topic that I want to discuss. I would like to discuss or say something about welfare economies. Welfare economies. The key economies under this particular schools of thought is Otto Pigou. Otto Pigou and Vilfredo Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto. These are the two economists that propounded this concept of welfare economies. Otto Pigou and Vilfredo Pareto. Welfare economies focuses on the well-being of individual society, exploring how resources can be allocated to improve overall social welfare. That is it. He explores how resources can be allocated to improve overall social welfare. So this school of thought combines economic analysis with ethical consideration about fairness and efficiency. It combines economic analysis with what? With ethical consideration. Ethical consideration about welfare and efficiency. About welfare and efficiency. Now, what are the core area or core idea of these welfare schools of economics, schools of thought, welfare economic schools of thought? What are the core idea of these schools of thought? One is market failure. Market failures. Two, Pigouvian taxes. Three, Pareto efficiency. And the last one, but not the least, is social welfare function. Social welfare function. So these are the core idea of welfare economies. So let's take them one after the other. The first one is market failure. Author Pigou emphasized that market do not always lead to socially desirable outcome. That is what Author Pigou said here. He said market do not always lead to socially desirable outcome. Why did he say that? He identified externality. Example of externality is pollution and public goods. Example of public goods are education, healthcare, as what? As sources of market failure. He identified he identified externality and public goods as sources of market failure. So because of this, people now advocated for government intervention by way of what? Taxing, by levying taxes or giving subsidy to correct this what? To correct these failures. That's what he said. That is, he emphasizes, he advocated for government intervention, such as taxes, levying taxes, or subsidy, giving subsidy to correct what? To correct this failure. So that is one of the core idea of welfare economies. So that is why August Pigou emphasized that market do not always lead to socially desirable outcome. That is, if you leave everything for market to determine, you may not get optimal results. Because of this, he advocated that government should rather play a very important role by way of levy taxes and giving subsidy when it requires, or if it requires, to correct this failure. Number two is Pigovian taxes. To address negative externality. Example of negative, Pigou proposed the use of taxes on harmful goods. Harmful goods is an example of negative externalities. Negative externalities like cigarettes, pollution. So these economists propose the use of taxes on harmful goods to internalize the social cost of this activity. So this aligns with the concept of corrective taxes. Corrective taxes. It aligns with the concept of corrective taxes. So Pigovian taxes. That is, if there are negative externality, government can levy taxes such that such taxes will help, will not help that particular country polluting to internalize the cost of its action into the what? To the cost of its production. So they call it corrective taxes. The third one is what we call Pareto efficiency. What is the Pareto efficiency? Efficiency simply means that anyway, Figorian, Filveredo, Pareto was the economy that came up with this idea of Pareto efficiency. This economist, Viveredo Pareto, he came up with this idea of Pareto efficiency. And what does it mean? It means this occurs when no one can be better off without making someone else worse off. That was the meaning of Pareto efficiency. You cannot make somebody better off without making someone else worse off. So a distribution of resources is considered efficient if no further improvements are possible without harming others. Let me give you an example of that. Let me some graphical illustration to demonstrate what it's trying to say. When talking about efficiency, what it means is that assuming we have something like this in the economy, we have something like this, for instance, x, say x2, x1, for instance. This point here A. Let's say we have another point here, C. These points are efficient points. Why? There is no way, if you want to move from C to A, look at it. If you are here before, this is what this person is consuming. Let's say OX2 prime. And this one is consuming OX1 prime. Now, if you want to increase the consumption, your consumption of OX1 prime, what do you think is going to happen to your consumption of X2? It's going to fall. Prime. So we can see that this point is efficient, meaning that there is no way you want to make this person better off without making this other person worse off. So there's a trade-off. That is exactly what we are trying to say here. There's a trade-off. If you are trying to make somebody worse off or better off, another person may be worse, must be worse off for it. So that point is what we call efficient point. Because as soon as you move away from here to here, somebody will be better off, another person will be worse off. So that's what we call efficiency in economics. So what Bureau Pareto introduced the concept of Pareto efficiency. What he says that there's no way you can make somebody better off without making someone else worse off. So that point is what is referred to as efficient point. So that's what we call Pareto efficiency. This is another core area or core idea of welfare economics. The last but not the least is the last one, which I said social welfare function. Welfare economics also explore the idea of social welfare function, which seeks to aggregate individual utilities into a measure of social well-being. What we're trying to say is that if you aggregate, let's assume you have X1, X2, X3, X4. If you now aggregate all this together, your social welfare now function, social welfare function, let me write it out clearly. Let's assume we have 5 individuals in this economy. We have individual 1 with utility X1, individual 2 with utility function S2, individual 3 with utility function S3, individual 4 with utility function S4, and individual 5 with utility. Let's assume these are the 5 people in this economy. So this is an individual utility function. To make it a what? A social one now, it then means you have to aggregate this utility function. To be n is equal to 5, I is equal to 1, xi, where I is the number of individuals in this what? In this economy. So this is what we call social welfare function. You have aggregated all these 5 together to give you social welfare function. This is another core idea of welfare economy. So welfare economies help establish the normative foundation. It helps establish normative foundation for modern economic policy. So in that it supports government intervention to correct market failures. It supports government intervention to correct market failures and as well promote the general welfare, which remain a central aspect of economic policy debate today. So in conclusion, historical development of economic thought has gone through significant phases from the classical eras, focus on free market and self-interest, to neoclassical economics refinement of marginal analysis and equilibrium theory. Utilitarian also introduced a focus on social welfare and happiness, while the last one, which is welfare economics, brought attention to market failures and the need for government intervention to enhance societal well-being. So these schools of thought continue to shape our thinking, continue to shape economic theory, continue to shape economic policy today. So each contributing valuable perspective on how economies function and how policy can improve the lives of individuals and society as a whole. On this note, I'm ending my class, and if there are questions, please feel free to ask me before I officially end this class. If there are questions, please feel free to ask. In the absence of no question, thank you. I want to end the class now, and God bless.